Lily had always been independent, guarding her heart and keeping everyone at arm's length, until Max came into her life. What started as playful banter between childhood friends soon evolved into something deeper, pushing Lily to confront her deepest fears of vulnerability and trust. But can love really blossom when you're afraid of losing yourself? Max's patience and unwavering commitment challenge Lily's walls, and together, they embark on a journey of self-discovery and unexpected love. Will she take the leap? Stay tuned to find out. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories. Lily Harper stood at the edge of the private airfield, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the runway. The roar of a helicopter's engine cut through the stillness as it descended, the blades kicking up dust as it landed. She squinted, shielding her eyes against the sun, and watched the pilot climb out of the cockpit. Max Turner, the last person she wanted to see after an exhausting week of back flights. It wasn't that she disliked him. She simply found his presence irksome. Always teasing, always joking, always getting under her skin. But as much as she hated to admit it, she couldn't help but feel that strange flutter of anticipation every time he was near. Max had been a constant in her life since childhood, their friendship built on a foundation of playful pranks, mutual annoyances, and an unspoken understanding that no matter how much they argued, they would always come back to each other. They'd spent years pushing each other's buttons, their rivalry as natural as breathing. They were like fire and ice, constantly clashing, yet inseparable. But that never stopped Max from testing her limits, especially now that they were adults. The fact that he still showed up uninvited at her airfield, just to check in, felt like the cherry on top of an already frustrating day. As he strode toward her, that signature grin on his face, Lily felt a familiar surge of irritation. "Finally, my favorite childhood enemy," he teased, his voice light and teasing. "I thought I'd have to fly solo for the rest of my life." Lily rolled her eyes, not even sparing him a glance. "Please. The last thing I need is you here distracting me." Max chuckled, unfazed by her cold reception. He had always known how to get under her skin, and for some reason, it never bothered him. "Oh, come on. You've missed me. Admit it." Without saying a word, Lily picked up the nearest object, a clipboard, and aimed it at his head. He dodged effortlessly, his laughter ringing through the air. That infuriating, cocky laugh. It made her blood boil. "Don't provoke me, Max," she snapped, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks. She was tired, physically drained from the long hours in the sky, emotionally spent from keeping up the facade of indifference whenever he was around. She couldn't understand why he had this effect on her. He was, after all, just Max. The same guy who had been her partner in crime all those years ago. The guy who had never once stopped teasing her, even when it had gone too far. She could still remember the day he'd put a frog in her locker in high school, the day she had found the love letter she had written hidden in the pages of her diary, delivered to the boy she had secretly admired. That had been the day she'd vowed to never let him get to her again. But here he was, standing in front of her with that grin plastered across his face. It felt like old times, but somehow everything was different. The more she tried to push him away, the more he came closer, wearing her defenses down. She grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and took a long swig, hoping to quench the burning frustration in her throat. She had spent so many years trying to ignore the connection they shared, but now, standing here with him, the lines between hatred and affection were beginning to blur. Max leaned against the counter, still grinning. "You can't hide from me forever, Lily. We both know it. It's always been this way. You and me, opposites, but we fit. Don't tell me you've forgotten that." She glanced at him, her eyes narrowing. You really think I'm gonna fall for your charm? Not happening. Max shrugged, unfazed. Who said anything about charm? I'm just stating the truth. You're still the same person. And I'm still the same person. Lily let out a long breath, feeling her shoulders sag.
I'm tired, Max. So please, just leave me alone.
But Max, never one to back down, stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. He reached out, nudging her gently with his shoulder, a teasing smile still playing on his lips. You sure about that? Because it doesn't look like you're as tired of me as you think. Lily opened her mouth to respond, but paused, her heart unexpectedly racing. She hated that he could still make her feel this way. Fine. Whatever, she muttered, turning away. But Max was right there, right behind her, and she realized with some horror that she wasn't pushing him away at all. In fact, a part of her wanted him to stay. She couldn't admit it, not yet. But deep down, she couldn't deny it either. She was caught between the past and the present, between the person she had been and the person she was becoming. And it all came down to Max Turner, the one person who had always been there, no matter how much she resisted. Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off as she watched Max walk away. His teasing grin, his unshakable confidence, it all felt too familiar. But as she stepped into her car and drove away, something gnawed at her. She wasn't sure what had changed, but for the first time in years, her thoughts lingered on him even after their banter had ended. Max had always been a source of frustration for her. His jokes, his pranks, his cranks, his constant pushing of her buttons. But today, something about the way he had spoken to her felt different. It wasn't just the usual back and forth that made her blood boil. It was something else, something she couldn't quite place. The drive to her family's estate was long, but it gave her the time to think, or at least try to distract herself. Yet no matter how much she tried to focus on the road or the playlist blaring through her speakers, her mind kept wandering back to Max. He was right. They were opposites. She had always been the one to keep her distance, the one to push away any hint of vulnerability. But Max had a way of cutting through her walls. His jokes, his laughter, they weren't just annoying. They were a gateway to something else, something deeper. That evening, as she sat at the dinner table with her family, Lily couldn't help but notice how everyone was acting, as if things were normal, as if her entire world wasn't crumbling around her. Her father, Henry Harper, sat at the head of the table, smiling as he spoke about work, about business plans, about the future. But Lily wasn't listening. Her thoughts were still with Max, still trapped in that fleeting moment when he'd smiled at her like nothing had changed. She couldn't deny that something had shifted between them, but the question was, what was it? She had spent years convinced that Max was just a nuisance, a constant irritant in her life, but now she wasn't so sure. "Lily, you're awfully quiet tonight," her father remarked, looking at her over his glass of wine. She snapped back to reality, forcing a smile into her face. "Just tired, Dad." "Long day?" Her father nodded, clearly satisfied with her response, but she could tell he wasn't convinced. He always knew when something was off with her. He knew she wasn't being truthful, but he let it slide. It was the same thing he always did, let her be. Dinner passed in a blur, with Lily barely registering the conversations around her. When the meal ended, she excused herself and retreated to her room, her mind still tangled with thoughts of Max. He was everything she didn't want. He was loud, obnoxious, and always seemed to know just how to push her buttons. And yet, the more she thought about it, the more she realized that her frustration wasn't just annoyance. It was something else. Maybe it was the way he never backed down, the way he always kept coming back, despite her attempts to shut him out. Maybe it was the way he had looked at her when they were together earlier. She found herself lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. How long had this been going on? She had spent years convincing herself that Max was just a nuisance, a childhood friend who would always be there to annoy her. But now, she was beginning to wonder if there was more to it than that. The thought of him being around, of his constant teasing and laughter, it didn't seem so irritating anymore. It felt comforting, familiar even. And that thought terrified her. The next day, Lily tried to distract herself by going into town, meeting with clients, focusing on anything but Max. But as she walked through the crowded streets, she couldn't escape the feeling that something was missing. She was going through the motions, but her mind kept drifting back to him. Max had become such a big part of her life, whether she liked it or not. He was the one person who had always been there, teasing, laughing, annoying her. But now, every time she thought of him, her chest tightened. She didn't know why, but the thought of losing him was starting to feel more unbearable than it had any right to. That night, Max texted her, "Don't pretend you don't miss me." It was playful, like always, but there was something underneath the words, something that made her heart beat a little faster. She stared at the message for a long time, unsure of what to do with it. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she considered replying, but in the end, she put the phone down and tried to focus on something else. But the next morning, when she saw him again, this time standing outside the airfield, waiting for her, she couldn't ignore the way her heart skipped a beat. Max wasn't just a childhood friend anymore. He wasn't just the annoying guy who'd always been there. There was something more now. Something she didn't know how to handle. He flashed that grin at her when he saw her approach. But this time, it wasn't just teasing. It was a little softer, a little warmer. "You missed me," he said, his voice more serious than usual. Lily opened her mouth to argue, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just stood there, frozen for a moment. Maybe he was right. Maybe she did miss him. Lily couldn't remember the last time she felt this torn. The night after Max had kissed her, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as the weight of everything pressed down on her. She had never wanted to feel this way, vulnerable, exposed, and completely off balance. But there she was, caught between the desire to push Max away and the undeniable pull that was growing stronger with every passing moment. She had always prided herself on being in control, on having a clear sense of who she was and what she wanted. But when it came to Max, everything felt blurred, like the lines between what she wanted and what she needed were no longer distinct. She had spent the past few days avoiding him, slipping through her days like a ghost, focusing on work, meeting clients, and making herself as busy as possible. But no matter how much she tried to immerse herself in her own life, Max's presence lingered, creeping into her thoughts when she least expected it. It wasn't just his teasing that haunted her. It was the way he had looked at her, the raw sincerity in his eyes when he kissed her. It was a side of him she hadn't seen before, and it was disorienting. She told herself it was just a kiss. A moment of weakness, a slip-up. But as the days went on, that kiss felt less like an accident and more like a turning point. It was the first time Max had done something so real, so serious, and it was the first time Lily had allowed herself to let her guard down enough to respond. She thought she could ignore it, pretend it meant nothing, but every time she thought about it, her heart raced. Max wasn't just her childhood friend anymore. He wasn't just the guy who had annoyed her for years, constantly pulling pranks and teasing her. He was someone else now, a person who had crossed a line and made her realize that maybe there was more to their relationship than she had ever allowed herself to see. She'd built walls around her heart for so long, telling herself that she didn't need anyone else. But Max had breached those walls with a simple kiss. And now she didn't know how to go back to the way things were. The tension between them was palpable every time they spoke. Lily found herself unsure of what to say or do. She was caught between the desire to push him away and the undeniable truth that something had changed between them. It wasn't just the kiss anymore. It was everything that came with it. The way Max had always been there for her, even when she didn't want him to be. The way he knew exactly how to get under her skin, but also how to make her feel like she was the only one in the room. He had always been a constant in her life, but now, that constant felt like something more, something she wasn't ready to confront. She tried to distract herself by throwing herself into work. She spent long hours at the airfield, diving into every detail of her business and avoiding any thoughts of Max. But one evening, as she sat at her desk reviewing some contracts, her phone buzzed. It was a message from him. She hesitated for a moment before opening it. "I'm not giving up, you know. I'm not giving up, you know. I meant what I said." Her heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, but they held so much weight. She could feel his presence even through the text, like he was standing right there in the room with her. Lily set the phone down, her mind racing. What did this mean? Was he serious? Or was it just another game to him? The truth was, she didn't know anymore. He didn't know whether she wanted to run from him or run toward him. Everything had become so complicated in the blink of an eye. She couldn't ignore the fact that a part of her was drawn to him, pulled in by something deeper than their years of friendship and rivalry. But there was still a voice in her head telling her that she couldn't let her emotions take over. She had worked too hard to build her life, to carve out a space for herself without relying on anyone. And Max. Max was a distraction, a complication, a risk. The next day, she found herself at the airfield again, preparing for a flight. She was doing everything she could to avoid thinking about Max, but when she looked up, there he was, leaning casually against the doorframe of the hangar, watching her. The moment their eyes met, Lily's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the intensity in his expression. It was like he knew exactly what was going on in her head, like he was waiting for her to make a move. "Max," she said, her voice tight, not sure what to say. She hadn't expected him to show up, especially after everything that had happened. "Lily," he said, his voice softer than usual. He pushed off from the doorframe and took a step toward her. "We need to talk." She wanted to refuse, to tell him that she didn't have time for this. But the words didn't come. Instead, she stood there frozen, caught between everything she had been running from and everything she couldn't deny. For the first time in a long time, she realized that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape Max. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to anymore. Lily stood at the edge of the airfield, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her jacket, feeling the wind tugging at her hair. The sky was a perfect shade of blue, and the hum of the helicopters around her filled the air with the familiar rhythm she had grown so accustomed to. It was her sanctuary, her space, and yet today it felt oddly empty. No matter how hard she tried to push it away, Max's words and that damn kiss kept invading her thoughts. She had never imagined that her world could shift so dramatically in just one moment. The night after their confrontation, Lily had tried to shut it all out. Her thoughts, her feelings, even the overwhelming sense of confusion that gnawed at her. She had told herself over and over that it was just a kiss, a stupid moment of weakness that meant nothing. She had told herself that she could go back to ignoring him, back to the way things were. But the reality was that she couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, felt the warmth of his lips, heard the vulnerability in his voice when he had finally confessed what had been lingering between them for years. That kiss wasn't a joke. It wasn't just a moment of fun. It was real, and it had changed everything. Max hadn't given up. That much was clear. He hadn't backed down, even when she tried to shut him out. He kept pushing, kept reminding her that he was still there, still waiting for her to acknowledge what they both knew deep down. But Lily wasn't ready. She couldn't be. She'd spent so long building walls around her heart, convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, that she didn't need him. She had her life, her work, her career. She didn't need the complication of love. Not now. Not with someone who had been nothing but an irritating presence for as long as she could remember. But then, there were those moments, those brief, fleeting seconds when Max wasn't the playful, infuriating man she'd known all her life. When he wasn't cracking jokes or teasing her, when he was just himself, vulnerable, honest. She had thought the ridiculous bet about marriage, was just a way for them to keep things light, keep the tension at bay. But now, every time she saw Max, she couldn't help but think about what he'd said. "I'm not giving up." It echoed in her mind like a warning, a promise that he wouldn't let her retreat into her comfortable, lonely corner without a fight. And, much as she hated to admit it, the thought of losing him was starting to scare her more than she was willing to admit. That evening, as she watched the last of the planes take off into the horizon, she saw him again. Max, leaning against his helicopter, arms crossed over his chest, looking as casual as ever. He caught her eye and smiled that damn grin, the one that had both annoyed and charmed her for years. But this time, it wasn't just a grin. There was something deeper behind it, something that made her stomach twist in a way she wasn't prepared for. "I didn't think I'd catch you here," he said, walking toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. His voice was light, but there was an edge to it, a seriousness that caught Lily off guard. "What do you want, Max?" Lily asked, trying to sound indifferent, even though her heart was pounding in her chest. Max stopped in front of her, his gaze softening just a little. "I want you to stop running from this." Lily's throat went dry.
What are you talking about?
"Stop pretending like you don't feel it," he said, his voice quieter now, more earnest. "Stop pretending like this thing between us isn't real. We both know it is." She wanted to argue, to tell him that he was wrong, that they were just two people who had been too close for too long and had grown used to each other's presence. But the words didn't come. Instead, she felt the heat rise in her chest, the familiar rush of emotions she had spent so many years pushing away. Max was right. Max was right. There was something between them, something undeniable, and she had been afraid to face it. "You don't have to make things complicated, Max," Lily muttered, turning away, unwilling to let him see just how badly her heart was racing. But Max stepped closer, his presence almost overwhelming now. "I'm not making it complicated, Lily. I'm just trying to make you see that you don't have to do this alone anymore. I'm here, and I've always been here. All you have to do is let me in." For the first time, Lily didn't push him away. She didn't turn and run. She stood there, her back to him, feeling his words sink deep into her heart. She had spent so long building walls, so long convincing herself that she didn't need anyone else. But maybe, just maybe, she needed him more than she had ever realized, and that realization terrified her. Without turning around, she whispered, "I don't know how to do this, Max." "I'll show you," he replied, his voice gentle, yet firm. One step at a time. And for the first time in her life, Lily found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take that step. Lily couldn't believe how much her life had changed in just a few short days. Max's words still lingered in her mind, echoing with a force she hadn't expected. The kiss, the confession, all of it had shaken her to her core. But even as the days passed, her heart couldn't seem to let go of the way Max had looked at her, the sincerity in his eyes that had made her breath catch in her chest. She tried to focus on her work, to bury herself in the comfort of routine, but everything felt different now. Max was no longer just the annoying childhood friend. He was more than that. He had become a constant presence in her mind, in her heart, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't push him away. The next few days were a blur. Lily found herself avoiding him, hiding behind her busy schedule, telling herself that she needed space. But no matter what she did, she couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something had shifted between them. It wasn't just the kiss. It was the way he had stood there, so vulnerable, so open. It was the way he had put himself out there, admitting his feelings even when he must have known she would push him away. And now, here she was trying to keep herself distant, but all she wanted was to turn back around and confront the truth she had been avoiding. One evening, as Lily was sitting at the airfield, her mind wandering, she spotted him across the tarmac. Max was leaning against the hangar, watching her with that grin on his face, the one that always drove her crazy. But this time, there was no teasing in his eyes. There was something softer, something real. And for the first time in days, Lily felt her heart begin to race. She wanted to turn away, to ignore him once again, but instead, she found herself walking toward him, drawn by the same force that had always pulled her in. "Lily," Max said when she reached him, his voice unexpectedly serious. "We need to talk." Lily hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. She had thought she could keep her distance, that she could shut him out. But standing there looking at him, she realized she couldn't. She couldn't pretend anymore. "About what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Max pushed himself off the hangar and took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "About this," he said, gesturing between them. "About everything that's been happening. I'm not gonna just let this go, Lily, too long. And I can't keep pretending like it's not there. You can't either." Lily felt the weight of his words settle over her like a blanket, smothering her in its intensity. She wanted to argue, to tell him that it was impossible, that they could never be more than what they were. But deep down, she knew it wasn't true. She had known it the moment he had kissed her, the moment she had felt her heart beat faster. She had always tried to keep her emotions in check, always telling herself that she didn't need anyone, that she could do it all on her own. But now, standing here with him, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as strong as she thought. Maybe she didn't have to do everything alone. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't just let go of everything I've built. I can't let you in. I'm not ready for this. For us." Max's expression softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "Lily, you don't have to be ready. I'm not asking for you to figure everything out right now. I'm just asking you to stop running from it. From me. From us." His words hit her like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, her entire world hanging in the balance. She had spent so many years running away from the possibility of being vulnerable, of allowing herself to feel something for someone else. But with Max, it was different. With him, it was impossible to ignore the connection that had always been there, no matter how much she tried to suppress it. "I don't know what to do," Lily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Max smiled, a small, understanding smile that made her heart ache. "You don't have to know right now. You just have to trust me. Trust us." Lily looked up into his eyes, seeing the sincerity in his gaze. She had always thought that love was something that came with certainty, something you could plan for. But now, standing there with Max, she realized that love wasn't always about having all the answers. Sometimes, it was about taking a leap of faith, even when you were scared. Slowly, cautiously, Lily nodded. "Okay," she whispered, her heart pounding. "Okay. For us." Max pulled her into a hug, holding her close, as if he never intended to let go. And in that moment, Lily knew, without a doubt, that this was the beginning of something new, something real. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she was ready to let herself fall. Lily stood in the doorway of her apartment, her fingers gripping the door frame as she stared out into the night. The wind rustled through the trees outside, but inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. She could hear the faint sound of her own breath, shallow and unsteady. It had been a week since she'd agreed to take the first step towards something she had been avoiding for years. Letting Max in. But as much as she had tried to convince herself that she was ready, the truth was much harder to face than she had anticipated. She had expected everything to change immediately, but here she was, feeling more uncertain than ever. Max hadn't left her alone since that day. Every time she saw him, his smile was unwavering, his energy infectious. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment for years, and now that it had finally come, he wasn't going to back down. Lily had tried to keep her distance, tried to focus on her work and her life, but somehow Max always found his way back into her world. He showed up at the airfield unannounced, texting her just to check in, sending her random messages about things that seemed insignificant, but made her heart race just the same. And every time he smiled at her, every time his eyes locked with hers, she could feel the walls she had spent so long building start to crumble. That night, he showed up again, like he always did. She wasn't surprised to see him standing at the foot of her stairs, waiting for her with that same look of determination on his face. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his jacket, and his shoulders were slightly hunched against the cold, but he still looked as if he owned the world, as if nothing could touch him. And yet there was something softer in his expression tonight, something she hadn't seen before. He wasn't the cocky, playful Max she had known for so long. This version of him was vulnerable, open, and it left her feeling exposed, as if he could see right through her. "Lily," he said, his voice low and steady, "I need to talk to you." She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known this conversation was coming, but she hadn't been ready for it. "About what?" she asked, her voice betraying the uncertainty she felt deep inside. Max stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "About us. About what's been happening between us. I can't keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not." Lily swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "Max, I don't know if we can do this. I don't know if I can do this." His expression softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. I'm not asking for that. I just want you to stop running from this. From me." The sincerity in his voice hit her like a wave, knocking the breath out of her lungs. She had spent so much time running from her own feelings, hiding behind her work, her independence, anything to avoid confronting the truth. But Max was right. She couldn't keep running. Every time she tried, she found herself falling deeper into the trap she had set for herself. She had tried to convince herself that she didn't need anyone, that she didn't need him. But with every passing day, that idea felt more and more like a lie. "I don't know what to do with this, Max," Lily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to let go of everything I've worked for. I don't know how to let you in." Max's grip tightened around her hand, and he took a step closer, his forehead gently resting against hers. You don't have to let go of anything. You don't have to change who you are. All I'm asking for is a chance for us to see where this can go. We've been dancing around it for so long, and I don't want to waste any more time. I'm not going anywhere, Lily. I'm here, and I'm not backing down. Lily felt the warmth of his words seep into her chest, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what he was saying. Maybe it was time to stop pretending, time to stop fighting the connection between them. Maybe it was time to let herself fall, to trust in something that had always been right in front of her. I don't know if I'm ready, she said, her voice trembling. But Max's smile was slow but genuine, and in that moment, Lily realized that this wasn't just about her giving in. It was about them building something new together, something they had both wanted but were too afraid to admit. He wasn't asking for her to change, and for the first time, she understood that she didn't have to. All she had to do was trust. Trust him. Trust herself. And with that, she finally let the walls fall, allowing herself to take that first step into the unknown, into whatever was waiting for them on the other side. The days following their conversation felt like a delicate balance for Lily. She had agreed to stop running, to stop pushing Max away, but every moment felt like she was walking on thin ice. She had never been someone who wore her heart on her sleeve, and now, with Max so determined to break through the walls she had spent years building, Lily wasn't sure what to feel. She had spent so much of her life keeping people at arm's length, protecting herself from the possibility of being hurt. But now, with Max standing so close, offering something she hadn't even allowed herself to imagine, she wasn't sure how to proceed. Max had been patient, giving her the space she needed while still making his presence known. Every time she turned around, he was there, his smile reassuring, his eyes filled with that same quiet determination. It wasn't that he was rushing her. It was more that he was quietly waiting for her to take the leap. But with every passing day, Lily felt the pull between them growing stronger, and yet, she still hesitated. One afternoon, as she sat in the quiet of her office, going through a pile of paperwork, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Max. Meet me at the airfield tonight. I want to talk. It's important. Her heart skipped a beat as she read his words. What could be so important? She had seen him just a few hours ago, when they had shared a fleeting conversation after one of her flights. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that would suggest urgency. She pushed the thought aside, telling herself she was overthinking it. But deep down, she knew something was different. As the evening approached, Lily found herself at the airfield once again, her nerves tightening with every step. She was hesitant, unsure of what Max wanted to discuss. When she saw him standing by the hangar, waiting for her, that familiar feeling swept over her. The flutter in her chest, the sense that something was about to change. He didn't smile this time, nor did he joke. There was a certain gravity to his expression that made her heart race. Something was different. Lily, Max said softly, his voice steady but tinged with something she couldn't quite place. I've been thinking a lot lately. About us. About what we're doing or not doing, as it were. Lily swallowed hard, stepping closer. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Max took a deep breath, his eyes locking with hers. I know I've been pushing, and maybe it's been too much. But I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to keep wondering if this is something real. I need to know, Lily. Do you feel the same way? The vulnerability in his voice, the honesty, hit her harder than she expected. Max had always been the playful one, the one who made light of every situation. But now, standing before her, he was laid bare, his heart open in a way that left Lily breathless. Lily could feel the tension building inside her, the rush of emotions she had been trying to keep at bay. She had known that this was coming, that eventually Max would push her to face the truth. But she wasn't prepared for how hard it would be to admit it to herself, let alone to him. She'd spent so long convincing herself that she didn't need him, that she didn't need anyone. But now, with him standing there, waiting for her, Lily couldn't lie anymore. "I do," she whispered, her voice breaking as the words left her lips. "I do feel the same way, Max. I've just been scared. I've been scared of what this means, of what it means for me, for us." Max's eyes softened, a quiet relief washing over his face. "Lily, you don't have to be scared. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to figure it all out right now. I just need to know that we're on the same page." The words she had been holding inside for so long finally found their way out, and the weight that had been pressing down on her chest for months seemed to lift. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding back, how much she had been holding back, how much she had been keeping hidden until now. She'd been afraid to let herself feel too much, to let someone in, but with Max, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was worth the risk. "I don't want to be scared anymore," she said, taking a step toward him. "I want to try, Max. I want to see where this goes. I want to be with you." Max stepped forward, his arms wrapping around her as he pulled her into a gentle embrace. For a moment, they stood there, the world around them fading away as they held each other, as if everything else had become insignificant. Max was right. She didn't have to figure it all out right now. She didn't have to have all the answers. She just had to trust him, trust herself, and take that first step into the unknown. "I'm with you," Max murmured against her hair, his voice steady and warm. And for the first time in a long time, Lily felt a sense of peace wash over her. The uncertainty was still there, but it no longer felt like a burden. With Max by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Together, Lily couldn't help but feel like she was living in a whirlwind. Every day felt like a blur of emotions, a constant push and pull between her heart and mind. Since that night at the airfield, where she had finally admitted her feelings for Max, things had shifted between them in a way she didn't know how to handle. They were no longer just childhood friends or irritating rivals. They had crossed a line, and everything was different now. Yet, as much as she tried to embrace it, the doubt still gnawed at her, whispering in the back of her mind. Was she ready for this? For what Max wanted? For what she wanted? Max had been patient, never pushing her too hard, but there was always that subtle, unwavering expectation in his eyes. He was ready. He was ready. He had made it clear that he wanted her, and not just in a fleeting, passing way. He wanted a future with her. But Lily wasn't sure she could give him that. She had spent so much of her life keeping people at a distance, focusing on her career, on her independence. She had convinced herself that she didn't need anyone else, that being alone was the safest option. But Max, he was different. She couldn't deny the way her heart raced when he smiled at her, the way her pulse quickened when he touched her, even if it was just a simple gesture. The tension was beginning to build, and the more Lily tried to ignore it, the more it consumed her. Max wasn't backing down, and neither was she. Their interactions were becoming more intense, more intimate. There were moments, fleeting seconds, when Lily would catch herself staring at him, lost in the depth of his eyes, wondering how she had never noticed how much he meant to her, until now. How had she spent so many years pushing him away, when all he had ever done was care for her in his own, infuriatingly persistent way? She was trying, she really was, to let herself fall into it, to trust in what they had. But each time she allowed herself to open up even the tiniest bit, she would pull back, fearful of what would happen next. Max wasn't like anyone else she had ever known. He didn't need her to be perfect, to have everything figured out. He didn't demand anything from her except honesty. And that scared her more than she cared to admit. Because honesty meant vulnerability. It meant showing him the parts of herself she had spent years hiding. It meant letting go of the control she had so tightly grasped onto for so long. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Max showed up at her door, as he always did these days. He didn't text her, didn't call ahead. Just appeared. His presence was both comforting and unnerving. But tonight, there was something different about the way he stood there, hands in his pockets, his gaze steady and serious. No playful grin, no teasing remarks. Just Max. And that was enough to make Lily's heart beat faster. "Lily," he said softly, stepping closer, "we need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat, and she immediately braced herself for another one of those heart-to-heart conversations they had been having more and more lately. She wasn't sure she was ready for this one, for what he was going to say. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Max reached out, gently taking her hands in his. "I know I've been pushing, but I can't keep pretending like I'm okay with you holding back," he said, his voice low, almost vulnerable. "I'm not asking for everything right away, Lily. I'm just asking for a chance. A real chance." Lily felt a lump form in her throat. She had told herself that she would take things slow, that she wouldn't rush into anything with him. But the truth was, every moment with Max felt like it was pushing her closer to something she wasn't sure she was ready for. "Max, I'm trying," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I really am, but I don't know if I can give you what you want. I'm not sure I can let go of all the things I've been holding on to for so long." Max's expression softened, and he took a step closer, his forehead gently resting against hers. "You don't have to let go of everything, Lily. You don't have to give me anything except your trust. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for you, just as you are." Lily closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her racing heart. She could feel the pull between them, the connection that was undeniable. And in that moment, she realized something that had been slowly dawning on her for days now. She had been scared, yes, but maybe that fear was just a sign of how much this meant to her. How much he meant to her. She couldn't keep hiding behind her walls, couldn't keep pretending that this wasn't real. "Okay," she whispered, her voice shaky but determined. "Okay, I'll trust you. I'll trust us." Max pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers, as if to make sure she truly meant it. Then, a smile spread across his face, a smile that held so much warmth and affection that Lily's heart swelled. He kissed her gently, a kiss that spoke more than words ever could. In that kiss, she felt all the hesitation, all the doubt slip away. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone in this, like they were in this together. When they pulled away, Max looked at her with a quiet intensity. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I'll be here, every step of the way. We'll take it slow, together." And for the first time in a long time, Lily believed him. She didn't need to have everything figured out. All she needed to do was trust him, trust herself, and let go of the fear that had been holding her back. With Max by her side, she knew they could face anything that came their way. And that thought, more than anything, made her heart finally feel at peace. Lily sat in the quiet of her apartment, the weight of everything she had been avoiding pressing down on her. The soft hum of the city outside did little to ease the tension building in her chest. It had been days since she had let herself admit the truth to Max, days since they had finally crossed that line, and yet the emotions swirling inside her felt like a storm she couldn't escape. It wasn't just about Max. It was about everything she had built, everything she had worked so hard to protect. She had spent years keeping people at arm's length, telling herself that she was fine on her own. But now, with him so close, with him breaking down the walls she had so carefully constructed, she wasn't sure what she was supposed to do. Max hadn't backed down. Every text, every message, every gesture had been an invitation to let him in, to allow herself to trust him in a way she had never trusted anyone before. At first, she had resisted. She had told herself that it was too soon, that they were just rushing into something they didn't fully understand. But each time she saw him, each time he looked at her with that unwavering certainty, Lily felt the walls around her start to crumble. He wasn't just trying to win her over. He wasn't just pushing her for the sake of it. He was offering her something real, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Tonight, however, Lily felt an urgency she couldn't ignore. After a long day of work, after another day of trying to focus on everything but him, she found herself unable to push the thoughts of Max out of her mind. Her phone buzzed across the table, and she didn't even need to look to know it was him. She had been expecting it even though she told herself she wasn't. The message was simple. "We need to talk." Lily's heart skipped a beat as she picked up the phone, her fingers trembling as she typed back, "What's going on?" She knew the conversation was inevitable, knew that eventually they would have to confront the tension between them. But still, a part of her wasn't prepared for this moment. The moment that could either bring them closer or push them further apart. The response came quickly. "I'll be at your place in 30 minutes. I'll explain everything then." Lily couldn't help the rush of nerves that flooded her body. She had never felt so uncertain, so unsure of what would come next. Max had always been persistent. But now there was something else in his tone. Something more serious, more intense than anything she had ever felt from him before. She couldn't deny that it made her anxious, but at the same time, a part of her was curious. Curious about what he wanted to say, about where they were headed. When Max arrived, he didn't waste any time. He walked into the apartment, his usual easy smile replaced by a look of quiet determination. There was no teasing, no joking around. Just Max, standing in front of her like he had come to a decision, like he knew exactly what he wanted. And he wanted her to be a part of it. Lily, he began, his voice steady. "I know we've been dancing around this for a while now. We've both been holding back, trying to figure out what this is, trying to keep things light. But the truth is, I can't keep pretending anymore. I can't keep pretending like this isn't something real. I don't want to waste any more time." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She had known this was coming, but hearing the words out loud made her heart race. She tried to steady herself, but the vulnerability in his voice made it difficult to focus. "Max, she started, but he cut her off, stepping closer, his gaze locking onto hers. "I've known what I wanted for a long time, Lily," he said, his tone soft but insistent, "and I want to be with you. I want this. Whatever this is between us. I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now. I'm not asking for you to figure it out in one conversation. But I need you to be honest with me. I need you to be honest with me. I need to know if you feel the same way." Lily felt her heart start to race again, her mind racing even faster. This was it, the moment where everything would either fall into place or shatter. She could feel the weight of his words, the sincerity behind them, and as much as she wanted to push him away, to deny the truth, she couldn't. She couldn't keep lying to herself. "I do," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but the words felt like a weight lifting off her chest. "I do feel the same way, Max. I've been scared of what this means, scared of what it might cost me, but I can't deny what I feel. I can't deny what I feel. I can't keep pretending that I don't want this, don't want you." Max's expression softened, a quiet relief washing over him as he took another step forward, reaching for her hand. "Then let's not pretend anymore, Lily. Let's stop dancing around this. We'll figure it out together. One step at a time." Lily's heart swelled with something she hadn't expected. Hope. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she realized that she wasn't alone in facing it. And that was enough to make everything else feel a little less frightening. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft shadows across Lily's room as she slowly stirred awake. She had barely slept the night before, her mind still reeling from the conversation with Max. It felt like everything had changed overnight. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it. Her heart was still racing from the vulnerability they had shared, the words that had been said, the promises that hung in the air between them. It was one thing to admit her feelings for him, but it was another to face the reality of what those feelings meant. As she sat up, the weight of the situation settled heavily on her shoulders. She had always been independent, always focused on her career, her goals, and keeping everything in control. But now, with Max becoming an undeniable part of her life, it felt like the ground beneath her feet was shifting. She could no longer hide behind her usual defenses, pretending that nothing had changed. And the worst part, she didn't know if she was ready to fully let go of that control. The sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand broke her from her thoughts. It was a message from Max. "I know we said we'd take things slow, but I'm not sure I can wait much longer to make this official. I'm serious about us, Lily. I need to know where you stand." Lily stared at the message, her heart pounding as the words sank in. Max had always been so sure of himself, so confident in his feelings for her. He had never wavered, even when she had pushed him away, even when she had tried to deny what was happening between them. And now, he was asking for something more. Something she wasn't sure she was ready to give. But the truth was, deep down, she wanted the same thing. She had just been too scared to admit it. After a few moments of hesitation, she typed out a response. "I need some time, Max. I'm still figuring things out. I don't want to rush into anything, and I don't want to rush into anything, and I don't want to hurt either of us." She hit send and set the phone down, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. She knew she had to be honest with him. But the truth was, she didn't know what to do next. Her emotions were all over the place, and the last thing she wanted was to make a decision out of fear or uncertainty. She needed to take her time to understand what she truly wanted. Later that afternoon, Max showed up at her door, just as she had expected. He didn't knock. He never did. He simply walked in, as if he knew exactly where he belonged. His smile was a little softer than usual, but there was still that unmistakable confidence in his eyes. He wasn't giving up, and that was both frustrating and comforting all at once. "Lily," he said, stepping inside. "I know you're scared, but I'm not asking you to have everything figured out right now. I'm just asking you to let me be a part of your life. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Lily's chest tightened at his words, but she held her ground. "Max, I don't want to lose control of my life. I don't want to be dependent on anyone. Not even you. I've worked so hard to build something for myself, and I don't know if I'm ready to let that go." Max's expression softened, his gaze filled with understanding. "I'm not asking you to give up anything, Lily. I'm not asking you to lose yourself. I just want to be there for you. I want to be part of your life, not to take over it." Lily let out a deep breath, her mind still spinning. She knew he wasn't asking for too much. He wasn't asking her to sacrifice her dreams, her independence. He was simply asking for the chance to share her life, to be there for her in a way that she hadn't allowed anyone to be before. "You're right," she said finally. her voice quiet but steady. "I've been so focused on not losing control that I've been pushing you away. I've been scared that if I let you in, I've been scared that if I let you in, I'll lose myself. But maybe I'm not as strong as I thought. Maybe it's okay to let someone else in." Max smiled, a small but genuine smile, and stepped closer to her. "Lily, you don't have to do this alone. I'm not here to take anything from you. I just want to give you something real." In that moment, Lily realized that her fear of losing control had been keeping her from experiencing the very thing she wanted most: love. It wasn't about giving up her independence or her dreams. It was about finding someone who would stand by her, support her, and help her grow. She'd been so afraid of vulnerability, of letting someone else see her weaknesses. But Max had never asked for perfection, and maybe that was exactly what she needed. "I'm ready," she whispered, looking up at him. "I'm ready to let you in." Max's eyes softened, and without another word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if to remind her that this was real. The control she had fought so hard to maintain was slipping through her fingers, but in its place was something far more beautiful: a partnership, a future with someone who cared for her, who truly saw her. For the first time in a long time, Lily felt like she didn't have to do it all on her own. And that thought, more than anything, made her heart feel light. Lily couldn't help but feel a sense of both relief and apprehension as she stood at the edge of the airfield, watching the horizon slowly shift from golden to pink with the setting sun. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions: vulnerable conversations, moments of closeness, and the overwhelming reality of everything she and Max had started to build. But as much as she had allowed herself to let go of her fears and insecurities, she still couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was all too good to be true. She had never imagined that this would be her life. Her, stand here, so unsure about the future, yet also so certain of one thing. She wanted Max by her side. The past few days had been a blur of small, quiet moments with him, ones that felt both foreign and familiar. They had been taking it slow, just like they'd agreed. But every time Max smiled at her or reached for her hand, the connection between them seemed to deepen. And it scared her. It wasn't the love she was afraid of. It was the change. The shift from the woman who had always been alone, always put herself first, to someone who was beginning to understand the power of partnership, the beauty of relying on someone else. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Max, just as she'd expected. "Meet me at the hangar tonight, 8 p.m. I need to talk to you." Her heart skipped a beat. The last time they had a talk, everything had changed, and Lily wasn't sure if she was ready for another life-altering conversation. But one thing had become increasingly clear to her: Max was determined, and he had no intention of walking away from this. So, with a deep breath, she pocketed the phone and headed toward the hangar. By the time she arrived, the airfield was quiet, save for the low hum of an engine in the distance. Max was standing by the hangar, his back to her, the cool evening breeze tousling his hair. He turned as soon as he heard her footsteps, his face breaking into that familiar yet somehow more knowing smile. "Lily," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything we've talked about." Lily's chest tightened, but she nodded, urging him to continue. "Look," Max began, stepping closer, "I know I've pushed. I know I've made it clear that I want us to be together, but I can't keep pretending like I don't need to know where you stand. I need to hear you say it." Her heart pounded in her chest. Max was asking for more. More than just her feelings, more than just a "we'll see how it goes" kind of answer. He was asking for her trust, her commitment, and she realized, in that moment, how deeply she had already given him both. It wasn't just about what he had to offer her and more. It was about the fact that she had allowed him to see parts of her she'd hidden for years. and she didn't want to hide anymore. "I'm not going to pretend I've got it all figured out," Lily said, her voice shaky but steady, "but I know I can't keep running from this. From you. I want to be with you, Max. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm ready to take the next step with you." Max's eyes softened, and for a moment, he simply stood there, taking in her words. It felt like the longest pause between them, but when he finally spoke, it was with a deep sigh of relief. "That's all I needed to hear. I'm not asking for all the answers right now, Lily. I'm not asking for you to have it all figured out. I just want to know that we're moving forward, together." Lily felt the weight of his words settle in her chest, and in that moment, it was as if a quiet shift had taken place within her. She had always thought that love was something you could plan for, something that happened on your own time. But now, standing here with Max, she realized it was something that happened when you let go of your expectations and embraced the unknown. "I'm ready to move forward," she said, her voice filled with newfound certainty. "With you." Max reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands, as if to make sure this wasn't just a dream. "I promise, I'm not going anywhere, Lily. We'll figure it out, one day at a time." And as his lips met hers in a soft, tender kiss, Lily felt the last of her hesitation melt away. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know where their journey would lead, but she was done pretending that she didn't want to walk it with him. She was ready for whatever came next, as long as it was with Max by her side. They pulled away, and for the first time in a long time, Lily felt truly at peace. She wasn't just standing at the edge of a new beginning. She was stepping into it, hand in hand with the one person who had always been there, waiting for her to take that leap. And she knew, deep in her heart, that together they could face anything the future held. The days after their conversation felt like they were living in a different world, one that Lily wasn't entirely sure she belonged to. The tension had eased between her and Max, but with it came an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability that left her feeling exposed. She had spent so much of her life fiercely guarding herself, focusing only on what she could control. But now, with Max by her side, she couldn't ignore the overwhelming realization that maybe, just maybe, control wasn't everything. She wasn't sure how she had gotten here, how she had gone from resolutely keeping her distance to opening up her heart. But every time Max looked at her, every time he spoke to her with that unwavering sincerity, she felt herself pulled further into a place she wasn't used to. He had become a part of her world in ways she hadn't expected. The thought of being without him, of returning to the solitude she had known for so long, felt unbearable now. That afternoon, Max sent her a text. "I know we've been taking things slow, but I've been thinking a lot about us. I want to make this official, Lily. I'm not asking for everything right away, just the chance to see where we can go. I think we're worth it." Lily stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. It wasn't that she didn't want this. She did. She had come to understand that she wanted to be with him, wanted to be with him, wanted to share her life with him in ways she hadn't imagined before. But the truth was, she wasn't sure if she was ready to take the next step, not yet. They had been taking things slow, and for the first time, she questioned whether they had been moving too fast or if her own hesitations had been holding them back. The phone buzzed again, this time a call from Max. Lily hesitated for a moment before answering, her breath catching in her throat. "Hey, Lily," Max's voice came through, warm and steady as always. "I know we've been talking about everything, but I just need to know if you're really in this with me. Are you ready for what's next?" Her pulse quickened as the weight of his question settled in her chest. She had been dancing around this moment for so long, terrified of the leap, afraid of what would happen if she finally allowed herself to feel everything she had been holding back. But she couldn't lie to herself anymore. She couldn't deny the way her heart ached when he wasn't around, the way she had begun to imagine a future with him by her side. "I don't know if I'm ready," Lily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I do know this. I don't want to keep running from what we have, from what I feel when I'm with you. I want to take that next step, Max. I want to try." The silence on the other end of the line was brief, but it felt like an eternity. And then, just as she was about to speak again, Max's voice broke through, filled with a quiet joy. "Lily, you don't have to have all the answers. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I just want you with me. I'm ready, and I'll wait as long as it takes. But I know we can make it work. Together." Her heart swelled at his words, the reassurance, and the patience he had always shown her, even when she had been too scared to give him a chance. "Okay," she said softly, her breath hitching as she spoke. "Okay, let's do this, Max. Let's see where it takes us." The weight that had settled over her chest for so long began to lift, the uncertainty that had plagued her finally starting to fade. There was still so much she didn't know, still so many unknowns, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to face them. Because no matter what happened, Max was there. And that certainty, that feeling of not having to do it alone, was enough to make her believe in the future they could have together. Later that evening, Max picked her up, just like he always did, with that familiar grin and a twinkle in his eye that made her heart skip a beat. "You ready?" he asked, his voice playful but filled with something deeper. Zen she couldn't quite name yet but knew was there. "I'm ready," Lily replied, her voice steady, her heart lighter than it had ever been. She stepped into his car, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. And as the night stretched on, the uncertainty that had once clouded her mind began to fade. They weren't just moving forward. They were building something piece by piece, day by day, something that, for the first time in her life, felt real, something that could withstand whatever came their way. And as she glanced at Max, his eyes focused on the road ahead, she knew that this was just the beginning. Together, they would find their way. As we come to the end of Lily and Max's story, we are reminded of the incredible journey that love can take us on, even when we're hesitant or afraid. The story highlights the importance of vulnerability and trust in building any meaningful relationship. Lily's struggle with letting go of control, her fear of losing herself in someone else, is something many of us can relate to. But what she learns, and what we all must remember, is that love isn't about losing ourselves. It's about finding someone who helps us become the best version of who we are. Max, with his unwavering support and patience, shows that love isn't just about passion, but about being there for each other, facing challenges together, and growing side by side. The story also teaches us that it's okay to not have everything figured out. We don't always need to know every step of the journey, but having someone to share it with can make the uncertain moments feel less overwhelming. Sometimes the greatest leap we can take is to let go of the fear of the unknown and simply trust in what we have. So, what did you take away from this story? Was it the courage to embrace vulnerability? Or the reminder that love is about growth and partnership, not perfection? Let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going.